Cheaters, adulterers of Reddit, why didn't you just break up with your soul instead of cheating on them? I cheated on my BF in high school because he threatened suicide every time I tried to break up, and being young, didn't realize it was manipulative and he probably wouldn't. I felt trapped as the person keeping him alive with a relationship and sex I did not want. And also like he do not deserve my monogamy because he was trapping me in it. So I got mine, and honestly the dude I cheated on him with, once he heard about the suicide thing, is the one who made me see I wasn't responsible for his life, and I was able to break up. Never cheated since, and I don't have regrets. My best friend was married to an absolute piece of shit for 5 years. And it turned out they'd only gotten married cause the asshole threatened to kill himself if they didn't. He was abusive and manipulative for the entire marriage, and threatened to kill himself pretty much any time my friend showed the slightest bit of independence. I'm so grateful for the day when he finally called his bluff and left. Apparently the prick went on up to the cliff tops, a known hotspot for suicide in our town, and threw a tantrum for hours until his mom drove down and picked him up. If I had known then what I know now about the things he did to my best friend, I would have gone up there myself and pushed him off. I'm so glad that you were able to leave when you did and didn't get trapped for longer. I've been involved with a similar situation. I've been off and on with a girl for years to varying degrees. She wasn't cheating as she always ended it with her ex, but every time it never lasted as he always guilted her back, threatening suicide. Unfortunately only she can realize he's probably talking BS, but for now it's got to the point I've had to accept she's probably never going to and try to move on. My little brother's first girlfriend did this. Unfortunately, she followed through. My bro had to get out, because she was basically driving him to thoughts of suicide. He figured him or her and cut off the relationship. She took her own life. She wasn't even 18, and my poor bro kept blaming himself and thinking he should have just put up with the abuse. It's such a selfish act. Her parents blamed him. He blamed her parents for never taking their daughter seriously. This is how I got out of my abusive HS relationship. After years of being smothered but tossed aside when convenient for him, I started to outgrow my environment. I had a traumatic death of a friend happen. He was only 17, so it rattled me. I ended up deciding to join the fire department so I could help people like my friend. Well, the person who helped me get signed up was someone I had developed a crush on. I worked right next to the department at the time, so a lot of them would pass through for coffee or something to eat. Anyways, the week I signed up I started hanging out there a lot. I ended up having drinks with them at one of their houses one night and got the balls to say something to the person I had been crushing on. Now my ex was fuming because I wouldn't go to his house and my phone would end up dying, so I wasn't answering his texts and calls. The night I ended up actually kissing the other guy. Come to find out my ex showed up there when my phone had died. Now I wasn't there. I was up the street, but my ex looked in all the windows, furious, and then backed into my car. I said fuck it and went for it with the other guy. I saw the texts from my ex about everything after I plugged my phone in. I don't even remember if I explicitly broke up with him at that point, but I started dating the other guy, and it was a nice change of pace. We only lasted some of the summer, but it was because I needed to get out of that toxic relationship. I ended up meeting my husband a year later, and I'm still good friends with the guy I had dated from the fire department. I was a firefighter for 7 years before hanging up my bunker gear to become a mom. I definitely see that week of events as a major turning point in my life, and I have no regrets about my choice. My ex had physically beat me multiple times. He cheated on me, lied, gaslit me, got pleasure out of making me cry and suffer. I did what I did because I wanted to feel happy for once and not that lovesick codependent kind. I emotionally cheated on my high school boyfriend, and I don't regret it. He liked me for a long time prior, and when I finally said yes, he treated me like he owned me. I felt trapped and suffocated. I couldn't wear the clothes I like and talk to other guys who are just my classmates. He's constantly jealous and always checks on my phone. Later on, Pandemic came and I talked to another guy who treated me with respect and affection. That's when I realized that I actually deserve better. I called it quits with the high school boyfriend and now happier than ever. I know it was bad, but I was young and stupid and didn't know how to implement boundaries. Should have broken up with him earlier. Just facts for you. Married 10 years. Wife refuses therapy and counseling. I've been in therapy for 11 years. Wife goes out of her way on the regular to remind me if we ever got divorced I would never see my daughter again. I have no family. She comes from money and makes twice as much as I do. We've had sex once this year. Yes, I jerk off, but the fact I'm 40 and married and have to sneak around to masturbate is depressing. What's more depressing? Feeling like you have no value to the opposite sex. I would absolutely cheat if given the chance. I've never cheated, but I think about it constantly. I feel like I'm going to look back on this time in my life and hate myself for giving up. Find a different therapist. You need someone in your corner and it's not this person. Also, you can call attorneys and get advice just over the phone. Make some phone calls and find out what your options are. You deserve a good life. Once you have things settled, the rest will fall into place. Go now to identify people who will help you take back your life. Your daughter deserves you in her life. Her mom is not such a great human being if she is abusing and threatening you. I guess this needs more clarification, and this was to illustrate there are shades of gray. My therapist is on my side. She is more to help me cope with years of abuse from my parents. I unfortunately didn't see the situation I was getting into due to me thinking all relationships were supposed to be unhealthy. I had nothing normal to compare to. My wife has some mental health, body image, and ego issues. I also believe at the very least she prefers women to men. She was raised strict European, Polish, Catholic by other people with mental illness. Her family and her lean heavy Republican and they tend to be racist. I do not want to leave my daughter alone to be influenced by that. We sleep in separate rooms. I know it's not right. You need a divorce lawyer right now. All the therapy in the world won't help right now as you don't feel valued. Cheating wouldn't be the answer or gain a sense of value. What will give you that feeling is taking control and realizing that you will be a better father figure for your daughter if you leave your wife. Sure, it will hurt, of course it will, but right now, to be blunt, you're showing your daughter it's okay to stay in manipulative and unfulfilling relationship, that someone else can decide if you're worth it or not. Well, my guy, lawyer up and give the lawyer all the facts they need. You could have a case for alimony since the income gap, child support if you're in a split parental situation. If you have a strong case you can push for primary parental rights, and if you document everything and happen to catch some opportunistic footage, you could be in a situation where you have to offer supervised visitations to your future ex. Lawyer consultations are free and confidential. Leave her. For your own sake. I'm glad you're getting therapy. At least you have a confidant in that kind of relationship. Better to cut it off at 10 years than go through another 10 with her. Maybe your wife realizes she doesn't have many redeeming qualities to be considered as a catch within her financial social circle. I've dealt with people who come from money. Everything is a transaction to them. At most, to her, a divorce will be a small financial inconvenience and a moment of social embarrassment. She's keeping your daughter hostage because that's the only heart she's created. Unless you're a violent career criminal with a history of abusing your daughter, it is highly unlikely they will terminate your parental rights if you live in the US, Western Europe, or a UK Dominion country. Talk to a divorce attorney. They will put you at ease and provide you with steps to assure you have your rights. And if she ignores the custody agreement and keeps her away from you, the court can adjudicate that what your wife is doing is abuse, and it won't look good for her in court. How old is your daughter? Do you live in the US? In the US, there are plenty of fathers who obtain custody of their children when they get divorced. From my experience, I would recommend talking to a divorce lawyer. I'm 27 and my parents divorced when I was 8. My parents technically got joint custody, although I was raised by my dad. My uncle, dad's brother, got full custody of his 2 kids when he got divorced from his ex-wife because his ex-wife didn't want custody. Doctor, depression, entitlement, and self-destructive desires created a black hole of self-indulgence with no regard for who I hurt in the process. Years of therapy, and open communication, total transparency have mostly mended the wound. I have a fetish, see username if you need more context, that I struggled for years to accept. When I first met my wife, I was open about it, and she would indulge me. I had no experience in handling a willing participant though, so I pushed the envelope as hard as I could. I tried to live out every fantasy I'd ever had, and never once gave any consideration to how it made her feel. Eventually, she was so over it, that she shut it down entirely. I resented it. We never talked it out and just passive-aggressively kind of coexisted. I still, for lack of a better term, worshipped my fetish and spent a ton of time looking at related porn online, and wearing them as often as I could. Then one of my parents passed away, and I fell into a deep depression, which I medicated by watching porn and playing video games as often as I could. My wife left me to my devices because she didn't know how to talk about it with me in a way that would get me to engage. I avoided conflict like the plague. I would verbalize agreement with her, try to escape the conversation, and go right back to living how I'd lived before. Resentment and self-destructive desires reached a boiling point, and I convinced myself that I deserved sex that indulged my fetish, found a willing participant, shamelessly used her too, and figured this was just life now. Then a friend sat me down for a talk and told me that he'd noticed how my wife and I had been cold toward each other lately. I'm not sure I can explain it, but something about someone else seeing the problem in my marriage made the problem real to me. An outsider could see something was wrong. So I confessed, wrote a letter expressing my darkest feelings, read it to her and braced for divorce. She moved out, we didn't talk much for a few months, and then somehow slowly rebuilt our relationship. I swore off pantyhose entirely in the real world, and tried to construct walls limiting my access to it online, which was a horrid overcorrection, and caused more resentment. But fortunately, our time in couples counseling paid dividends in communication, and I listened when she talked. I recognized some of the mistakes I'd made in correcting from the first time we went through a rough time, and found a happy middle ground with them. You both should feel very proud of the progress you've made communicating with each other. It's really not an easy thing what you went through, both as a couple and as individuals. Also, I really appreciate the way you wrote your story. Not only was it well written, I appreciate your honesty and love the happy ending. It's good to know that couples can go through such hard times and still find the love that keeps them together. So, at the age of 28 and only having had 3 serious relationships, 2 of them I was cheated on, but I know why. The first to cheat on me straight up told me, "You're one of those kind of guys every girl wants, but once we're with you it's kind of boring." In other words, I was too soft. The second was my most recent ex, who left me on New Year's. Had been cheating on me most of our relationship with her coworker. Never gave me a clear reason, but I suspect it's because he was well-built and good-looking and I'm just me. I'm quiet, non-confrontational, financially stable, and I'm a homebody type. I don't drink, I don't like bars or clubs, and I kinda just stay home and read books and keep up with my favorite scientific journals. I'm boring and I know it. Those women were exhibiting piece of shit behavior. I hope you know, being quiet, non-confrontational, homebody, no alcohol, etc. is definitely not a reason to have your trust betrayed in a romantic relationship. In addition, there are definitely people in the world that would prefer your personality type to a wild partygoer. It's awful that someone told you every girl wants you but you're boring. She sounds insane if you ask me. Like, what did she think? Are you supposed to be a roller coaster ride providing her with endless excitement? Like, what even is that statement? Sounds like her life was boring to her, so she cheated on a good person and blamed it on you being boring. That's just my opinion. I'm 60, and although I was never cheated on, and my relationships lasted up to 7 years, it became clear that I was never going to be attractive enough to hold the interest of any woman. Even an ugly woman knows I'm ugly. So, 8 years ago, I just stopped with relationships altogether. I've never been happier and I wish I had done it years ago, but like you, I believe the Disney lie. What I can tell you is it will literally never change for you, and you should ask yourself if you are getting out as much as you are putting in. In my case, the answer was hell no, and so now I put that effort into myself. Most guys only figure this out after they pay some woman half their earnings who never lifted a finger for them. I kept that money myself along with all the time and effort. I have to say, I was in a very bad state of mind. I have BPD and I wasn't being treated at the time, so I was in my worst. I thought I was in love with my BF back then. I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him, but the truth is I was only obsessed and I was being so manipulative towards him. He was scared of breaking up with me, but he didn't want to spend time with me, refused having intimacy, and was plainly sick of having me around, and I needed so badly the attention I cheated on him with the first guy showing interest in me. We both are doing much better, broke up after having a baby together, and are overall happy without each other. I am in love with my BF now and I would never think of pulling that kind of BS on him. I broke up with my ex because I finally grew up. He was my first of everything. First boyfriend, first kiss, etc. etc. When I met him he didn't check all my boxes, but there was just this undeniable attraction. It was intense and I could not get away. A year into the relationship, I found out I was pregnant. I told him and he said that he's happy and he will do everything for me and the baby. March 2015. I went into labor 3 weeks too early. He couldn't leave his work so I gave birth to our child without him. She has his nose in his hair. 2 days after the delivery, while recuperating at the hospital from a C-section, the family welfare coordinator came to our room. She's about to process my daughter's birth certificate. She asked me whether the father will visit soon because he has to sign the forms, otherwise they will have to keep the father's name blank. This is the protocol and the law. Because the father and I were not married, I think at that moment I knew that we will never work out. He couldn't leave a job, practically 1 hour away, to see his own daughter. I could not cry, so I just kept silent and told the nice lady from family welfare that I will only be the one who will sign the forms. We came home. Me and baby stayed with my parents, and for the next 8 months I never slept more than 2 hours at a time. It took a whole month for my scar to heal. According to the doctor, one reason is I was depressed. I cried every night out of self-pity. On my daughter's first month, he finally visited. He took her in his arms for a few minutes. He didn't stay more than 2 hours. We didn't talk. He didn't tell me what his plans were. The same thing happened on my daughter's second month. That visit was even shorter than the first. That visit was the last. I stayed with my parents and he stayed away. Still, I kept sending him photos of her through social media. I shared with him all her firsts. I tried not to pressure him. Sometimes I asked him what his plans about us were. He just kept telling me to wait. He said we will be together someday. This went on for 2.5 years. Then one night, as I was on my way home from work, and I realized we haven't communicated any weeks, and I'm okay. I don't need him. We don't need him. I have enough love and care for my daughter. I have my parents who absolutely adore her. I have great friends who believe in me. I have a promising job, a great break in my career. That same night, I sent him a message and thanked him for my daughter. I told him I forgive him and that I wish him a happy life. If we hadn't met, I wouldn't have the most precious gift ever. He was so wrong, but my daughter made everything right. He never loved me, because if he did, he would have done everything to be beside me, instead of being stopped by so many reasons and excuses. And at that moment of realization, I was free to stop loving him. I deserve more than the occasional text message. I deserve more than empty promises. I deserve a man who will stay up all night to help me take care of our child. I deserve a man who will not hesitate to come to me when I need him. I deserve a man who will be my partner through all the pains, not just the pleasure. I deserve a man. He wasn't one. I finally got it. I finally grew up. It's been a year since then and me and the kid are doing great. She's healthy and happy and I'm working 2 jobs so I can support our little family. I am working on becoming a better person every day. I'm still growing up. It's an exciting stage, and I am hopeful for the future. I was raped at 13, then again every weekend between the ages of 16 and 17. My teenage solution to never get raped again after this was to never say no to sex. Also, I tended to freeze and shut down, unable to communicate. I bounced between relationships, broke it off every time I cheated, until I met my current husband. From that time I made sure never to be alone with someone apart from him, until a friend gave me a ride home. I let it happen, stayed quiet and shut down, so I cheated. The next morning I told my then boyfriend, now husband. He decided to stay. I loved him since the moment we met, so I'd never leave. After that I fell apart, started fainting often. At times I became temporarily physically paralyzed and was incapable of walking. PTSD kicked in. Years of therapy later, I'm doing okay. It will never happen again. What happened to you sounds terrifying, and I'm glad to hear you are doing okay. You have no obligation to answer my next question, but how do you feel about the behavior of those people you wouldn't say no to? A lack of verbal no doesn't equate to yes. Furthermore, if a sexual partner of mine was noticeably freezing, shutting down and unable to communicate, I would feel like a rapist if I went any further unless we'd had a very specific conversation about it. Maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but it sounds like you've potentially encountered an obscenely high number of people with at least legally questionable sexual behaviors. I ask myself this a lot. I very much regret what I did, I won't lie, but the only thing I can really come up with is, I was miserable, and scared, and mentally flailing at what I should do. We were married, and I was scared to break a Christian relationship. I am agnostic, so come from a very religious family, and I wanted to try and honor that, but I was miserable, and was trying to make something better for myself. When so found out, the circumstances of that are generally irrelevant. They were gracious at first, and we worked through it. And then at every instance it was thrown back in my face, and I ended up filing for divorce about 2 years later. Moral of the story, I was miserable, and didn't know how to handle it.